Hello and welcome to this seminar about IBCS goes ISO. My name is Jurgen Faist. I'm partner at IBCS Institute, and I'm really happy to run this webinar today. It's a milestone in our in the development or in our work for the, let's say, past 20 years of Rolf Hichert, my partner, and later on with myself. We are on our way of making the IBCS standards part of an ISO standard. And this is probably an announcement we have been waiting for many years. So today's webinar will be about our path, the path of IBCS towards an ISO standard. Right up front, it's not an ISO standard yet. It's just the registration as an ISO project, and we will be working on that project. But more about that later on. Two organizational things. Our webinar today, or it's more a kind of webcast, will be 30 minutes of, let's say, presentation and discussion between my guest today, Diego Berea. I will introduce him later on. And after those 30 minutes, we have a maximum of 15 minutes for questions and answers. So feel free to ask whatever you want to ask. Make sure you ask it in the Q&A section of Zoom webinar. So not in the chat, but in the Q&A section. The chat won't work. So please use the Q&A section for your questions. Okay, so let's get started. As I said, we are really proud to have this webinar today, and it's a true milestone in our development. I think from the many registrations we had for this webinar, I think a lot of you already know about IBCS, but I hope you don't mind that for those who are not aware what IBCS is about, that I start with a short introduction, really briefly, about IBCS. What is IBCS about? Okay, so as I said, today's webinar, first an introduction about the International Business Communication Standard, what it is about, and then I will introduce our guest speaker today, Diego Berea, and we will talk about ISO 24896, which is about notation for business reports. So what is IBCS about? Those who know me know that I'm a passionate musician and I'm writing musical arrangements. And I was not aware, at least in my early days, that music notation is something really great out there. I just took it for granted. It was just normal. All the people think, well, it's the normal, let's say, way you work with things in music, that you just have those 5 lines and the dots on those 5 lines. And if you look at that, oh, no, I didn't want to go there. If you look at that, we have some let's say, Eastern music. We have old ones. We have more popular ones. So there is all kind of music here, really old one, and it's still all of them look the same, which is completely different to what we see in business. You know, music notation is the communication medium between a sender, which is the composer, and a receiver, which is the musician who wants to play the music. And the cool thing is, it works even if the composer has been living 300 years ago, and you still can play the music of Beethoven. It works. It works over regions. It works over time. It's just you record, the composer records his idea on paper, and the player can just, let's say, get the idea by reading the sheet music. This is so cool. And it's in a lot of other disciplines, it's just the same. Look at architecture, look at engineering, and whatever. And we in business, we think we can communicate between a sender, let's say an analyst, and a receiver, let's say a manager, by using that stuff. And this is a real Google search. We just did a Google search. Hey, show me some great dashboards. This is what you get. a plethora of completely different looking reports. And they are different for two reasons. First of all, it's different creators, and they follow, let's say, the personal taste or the personal ideas of those creators. So if a receiver, let's say a manager, gets reports from two different creators, authors, they will most probably look different. And the second reason is that the software does not create the same results. So if you create a report in Power BI and you have another report created in some SAP BI tools, let's say the Analytics Cloud, they will look pretty different. And this is what IBCS is about. We started to fight that. Let's say Rolf, my partner, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and I joined 11 years ago. So let me just introduce 5 of those ideas, maybe rules or principles of IBCS that will help getting a consistent notation. First of all, we could use consistent titles. Why? The musicians have that, and the architects have that, and the engineers have that. So why don't we have a 3-line title in the top left corner of every single PowerPoint slide, dashboard, Excel table, whatever, you name it. First row is who are we talking about? Second row, what are we talking about? Third row, when is that this happened? Okay. Second thing, we could agree that the direction of time is always horizontal. So never again vertical time series. And of course, time is running from left to right. This even works in cultures where they typically write from right to left. In charts, they still, at least in business, they typically have time running from left to right. Okay, so we have a horizontal time axis. And well, the third thing is, we do not only have actual data. So let's talk about what we call a scenario notation. If everything would be actual data, we probably would do them completely actual, which is solid. But as we know that there is no actual data from August, we only have a forecast, and we show the forecast differently, in this case hatched. And you see, even the full year has changed. Now the full year has a part in solid and a part in hatched. And then we can, of course, add the plan. And why don't we consistently show plans just outlined, not filled yet, just outlined, Then we talk about variances, the most important thing for analysts looking at variances. Why don't we just agree that red and green, or red and a bluish green for people with some color deficiency, use the same kind of visualizations for variances? Like this, for instance, this is now a waterfall. We could also show it with simple variances. And if it's a relative variances, then it's not the thick column, but it's just a very thin column. We call them pins. Just a consistent notation of variances. And fifth, this is the last one. If we want to highlight something, then we should use consistent indicators for that highlighting. For instance, I'm sure you realized, let me go back. You realized that we have a break in scale here. So the monthly scale and the annual scale, they don't fit to each other. Actually, the annual scale is a kind of average monthly scale. We should indicate that. So let's use consistent indicators. In this case, oh, yeah, now we know let's say the multiplier that we have been using to break the scale. Or if we just want to add a message, which is about the minus 19% here. So we have the message now, and then we highlight, maybe by using just a circle or something like that, in a consistent highlighting color. We use a consistent indicator. And if we do that, then we get just similar looking stuff. You see that all those things look similar, which is absolutely great. So if we do another Google search, show me some IBCS style reports, this is what you get, which looks pretty different from that. So this is what IBCS is about. And we started to collect those ideas around 10 years ago, in IBCS, International Business Communication Standards 1.0. We decided to give it to the public as a Creative Commons project. So it's free, it's open, everyone can go to our website. And if you register on our website, you even get access to a 150-page PDF and you can start commenting. So it's also a community-driven approach like you have it in open source models in software development. So free, open, community-driven IBCS. Now, where are we today? The International Business Communication Standards today have a, let's say, we have a kind of association behind that, which is a not-for-profit association. And those people in the association work on the standards. So 30,000 members, 13,000 members of the IBCS association so far, and from 130 countries. So, well, we have been training more than 8,000 participants. We have 11 IBCS certified software packages. You find them on our website. There are, let's say, 80 IBCS certified consultants, even some more, and hundreds of companies applying IBCS to a certain degree. Some of them really to 100%, others starting doing it, but to a certain degree, really hundreds, maybe even thousands in the meanwhile. And there has been a scientific study proving that if you apply such a consistent language, it's so much easier to understand for the receivers because they use their pattern recognition. And they have been proving that understanding is 46% faster. And if you then ask questions about the reports you have seen, then there are 61% less errors in those answers. So it's not only faster understanding, but also better understanding. Well, this is where we are, or where we have been with IBCS, let's say 1.5 years ago, something like that. This was the time where I've been giving an online training course. And in that online training course, we had a participant from Spain. And it turned out that this participant from Spain is a really interesting guy. So let me introduce to you Diego Berea from Spain. Hi, Diego. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Well, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's stop sharing and just have a short discussion. So what happened in that, no, actually did not happen in our training course, it happened thereafter. So Diego has been listening to that training course and thereafter, and he did not say anything. He just listened and we have been discussing. And after that course, he reached out to me and he said, Jurgen, this is so cool what you are doing. But hey, why are you doing that as an IBCS associate? How does that in detail work? And it turned out that that Diego is a specialist in creating standards because he has been working in standard creation for ISO many years before. Maybe Diego, introduce yourself. What's your passion about ISO and in what field do you know ISO?
Okay. Well, I've been involved in ISO standard development for about almost 15 years, since 2010, that I attended my first international meeting in Japan, representing Spain. And I work as a consultant in service management, so it's related to ITIL and an international standard called ISO 20000, which was published for the first time in 2005. And when I joined first the Mirror National Committee in Spain, and then ISO as a representative, as a head of delegation from Spain in 2010, the second edition of that ISO 20000 was under work. So I joined, I was able to participate, and I had luck, and I met in my first night in Japan the lady that was leading ISO 20000 Part 2, and she asked me for help. I stood one night reviewing comments. Now Jurgen knows what reviewing comments means. in ISO, and well, I was suggested as co-editor of that ISO 20000 Part 2. So since then, I'm not only a representative of Spain in that ISO committee, but also co-editor of one of the standards. The co-editors is the word, the editors, the word that we use in ISO for the authors, the guys that write the first draft, but we never call them authors because you are not really an author. You keep the management of the evolution of the document, but only in the initial drafts you can add some creativity. From that point on, you can only reply to comments provided by the different national bodies, by the different countries that belong to the standard. So from that point on, you manage the comments and propose different alternatives and try to reach consensus among the different countries, and all the countries together are the authors of the standard. So when you become a part of an editorial team, you are no longer an author. You are just someone that manages the evolution of the document.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you. Guys out there, you see, he's a specialist in IBCS. He know exactly how the procedures, processes, and the organization, how that works. And this is why he has been asking me, hey, Jürgen, have you never been thinking about whether IBCS should be an ISO standard? So what is IBCS? What recognition does that organization, IBCS association have? We said, well, we just needed a kind of let's say, association that moves forward with that. But well, of course, there is no public recognition or whatever acknowledgement of that. And he said, well, shouldn't we make it an ISO standard? And my answer was, Diego, Rolf, my partner Rolf Fichert, and I, we have been thinking about that maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe even more. And we reached out to the German standardization organization, DIN. Yeah, maybe some of you know that, DIN A4, huh? The DIN. And the DIN guys told us, well, if you want to create a standard, then the typical path is you first start with a so-called DIN spec, which is a specification of a specific topic, not a standard yet. Then you suggest that DIN spec to become a local German standard. Then you have a DIN standard. And then once you have a DIN standard, then it would be the next step to suggest to the international bodies that it would be great to have this German standard also all over the world.
Yeah.
And we said, oh, how long will that take? And they told us, well, years. And we said, hey, and not to talk about money and effort you have to spend into that. So Rolf and I, we decided this is probably not for us. And we completely stopped that. And this was the point. I told that story to Diego, and Diego was laughing. And Diego was laughing. And he said, well, you can do it that way, but maybe I know different ways of doing that. And what did you then suggest, Diego?
Well, yeah, what you have said is the most typical way of developing an international standard, creating a local standard in one country. And if it's successful, it's not only that the standard as a German standard would be developed, it's that it has to be successful. You should show in some way that a number of companies are applying the standard. Okay, so you need to have some support in order to suggest ISO to do a fast track and convert the national standard into an international standard. It happens quite often. It's very typical with some standards that you may know. For instance, ISO 27001 about information security was initially an British standard. It's quite usual that a British standard becomes a BS standard, British standard becomes an ISO standard using this process. But it takes time because the developing of a standard takes years, and you have to provide evidence of some support from organizations to the standard before you can start the process of becoming an international standard at ISO. the good point is once that I am already developing or participating in the development of one standard, I more or less know the people, some people in ISO, and there are some shortcuts that you can use. And my suggestion was to start directly as an ISO standard, which is not impossible if it happens. It's for instance, now there are several initiatives related to artificial intelligence, generative AI, things like that. So they go directly as ISO proposals. So I knew more or less how it worked. So I knew that, first of all, we need to find a technical committee to host us. And well, I suggested Jurgen to contact a number of persons in ISO, asking that we had an initiative that we consider that it could be interesting for ISO. So we were redirected to a weird technical committee for us, and a specific working group about plain language. So it's a technical committee and a specific working group where most of the people are linguists, are translators, things like that. We said, okay, this initially doesn't seem to be exactly the best fit. And I said, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. Let's go on. The idea is to start. Once you have the document, the proposal approved, if this is not the place, we can ask for a change. Now, honestly, I think we are in a fantastic place. We will talk about that probably later. But at that point, the idea was just to have some technical committee to host us and then work in what it's called a new work item proposal. A new work item proposal is some kind of form that you fill saying, okay, we want to develop a new standard on semantic notation for business reports, and it would be fantastic for the market because of this and this and this, and it will provide these benefits, blah, blah, blah. You have to fill some fields that it has, and it's not fully required, but it's convenient to attach a draft. So I suggest Jurgen and his team to start working on such a draft. And well, I played my role on, just being picky. No, this is not the way. Read the ISO directives so you can understand more or less how an ISO document has to be written. So we made our homework so we could provide not only the new work item proposal form, but also a consistent document of more than 20 pages with a first draft.
Which is great because then two things fit together. You knew how an ISO standard should look like, so with all the technical details, and we actually already had the content. The content was there, so we just had to mix those two things. I want to come back to the question: what technical committee and what working group would be appropriate to us? As Diego said, we were surprised about, hey, language and terminology, which is the technical committee, and the working group, plain language. But plain language is about making language better understandable. So when we thought the second time about it, we thought, hey, what we suggest here with the IBCS notation is a kind of visual language. And the purpose of that visual language is making things better understandable, which is plain language. So if they would have called it plain visual language, we probably would have immediately agreed. And this way we thought with a second let's say, thought, hey, probably the ISO program management who assigned us to that specific working group, they probably understood what we are doing. They probably better understood than we had expected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the point is, first of all, we were lucky because the convener of that working group, a guy from Australia, was very helpful. He allowed us to do some presentations online in his working group to all the representatives of the different countries. And lucky enough, a few weeks after, there was their annual plenary meeting in Brussels in the European Parliament. So we were invited to do an initial presentation there. So then we went there.
Maybe I should share a picture. Just a second. I would like to share that picture. I was so proud. I was so proud. You see that? It's, oh, is it there? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So you see me speaking in the premises, not not in front of the European Parliament, but on the premises. So in the location of the European Parliament, you see here. Um, here, Commission Européenne, European Commission. I'm in, so I as a speaker and what we then did is we just presented the idea of the draft Diego has been talking about, a bigger audience of ISO. And well, the result was incredible. The people in the room, they said, hey, oh my, isn't there something existing like that? Are you sure this is entirely new? It's so obvious that something is needed of that kind. So, well, probably we should move on with that. Yes, and then we moved on with that. This is
Yeah.
exactly the process Diego has been
Yeah, well,
describing. Yeah.
before starting the new work item ballot, if you remember, we were asked to submit a proposal whether this technical committee accept the initiative.
Ah,
So
yeah.
there was an initial ballot just to say, hey, this fits in our technical committee. And there were some comments saying, hey, but we are linguists and translators. Is this really for us? But the majority of the people say, hey, come on, let's go, let's do it. And even the people in the plain language working group were very supportive. And in fact, a few of them were already some way related with visual representations, things like that. Probably not exactly what IBCS is doing, but they initially could easily understand what we were talking about. So they were very supportive. And so that was the first, the ballot to see if TC 37 was the right place, and we were approved.
Yes.
So since that point, we became part of the Working Group 11 inside ISO Technical Committee 37. And then we started the required tasks to submit that new work item proposal and prepare the draft. That was more or less.
This is the application process, let's say. We
Yeah.
apply then for creating a new standard. Now that we have been part of that technical committee, we applied for the new standard. And we further development this draft, what's called an expert's draft, and submitted that draft together with this application form for the new work item proposal. Well, it took longer than we expected, but
Yeah.
finally,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, we did things quite well. In Brussels, we started lobbying, which was, Jurgen was a bit worried about what we were doing, because the important thing was to get support from as many countries as possible. So it's that easy as going to the health delegation of the UK, the US, Japan, China. Hey, would you support us? What do you need to support us? Do you need any further explanation? And at some point, Jurgen was a bit worried about me being that direct, talking to the different representatives, but they know how it works. It's a process where you need support from different countries. In fact, when the first ballot for the new work item proposal was finished, it was a little bit disappointing because we got the number of yes votes required for the standard to progress, but it was required that at least 5 countries nominate an expert to participate in the editorial team, and we got 4. We were expecting more because in that previous acceptance ballot, we got several other countries saying, hey, we want to participate and contribute. But, well, that probably it was an error from our side to assume that we would get enough support. So we did that ballot. it was not successful because we were missing one country suggesting a representative, and then
excuse me, Diego, we should tell the reason. We asked
yeah.
them, hey, why didn't you then send an expert? And they said, hey, we would have wanted to send experts, but hey, we are linguists and translators and interpreters. We do not know too much about business reports and about data visualization. We just can't. So this was the answer we got. Yeah.
Yeah. So a few months after, we asked for a new ballot, and of course, we tried to do our homework before. So we contact several different countries that were willing to participate. In that time, also some IBCS consultants and trainers were working on the national side to become representatives of their countries in ISO. So, people from Italy, from Turkey, from I don't know which other countries, but a few other countries that belong already to the IBCS association, that they are consultants, trainers, etc., started the process to become experts in their national certification body, so they could participate in the development of this standard. So that helped also. And in that second attempt, we got many more than required, more than 10 countries representing, suggesting some representatives to become experts.
So if I may share again my screen, this is now the editorial team we have. Huh? And if you look at them, it's 12 countries plus the IBCS association as an liaison. It's a kind of let's say, connected organization with all those people. And it's not only people from the IBCS environment. Okay, there are some of them, but there are even more that come from the plain language side, that come from countries that just send experts we didn't know before, neither from the technical committee nor from the IBCS side. And now we have an editorial team of 12 people, and we started working on that. We come later on, we will come to that. But this is absolutely great to see that we have additional knowledge from the plain language side, which I hope you agree, Diego, really helps in moving forward with that standard.
Yeah.
We are no linguists, but they help us in creating the draft. This is really great.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's very important that we got enough support, but we also got the big names worldwide represented. We have the US, we have Australia, we have China, we have Japan. We miss, for instance, India. It's a very active country in every single standard, but okay, we have a broad representation. It's not just a few German-speaking countries around IBCS leading the initiative. No, we have representatives from many different points in the world, which is very important. And having the support of the big countries is also relevant because that will help that when the standard is published to get that support that is required for the standard to be alive.
So finally, end of July, we got the final approval that our work item proposal, and we really should make that clear, our work item proposal has been accepted. It's not that there is now a final ISO 24896 standard yet. We don't have that standard yet. Our work item proposal has been accepted. And well, you already find that on the ISO web page. So if you go on the ISO page and you search for ISO 24896, you will find this standard notation for business reports, and you see how they call it. They call it an approved work item. So a working group has prepared a draft, but the thing is under development. I think this is really important to say. Huh?
Yes, at this point, it's very important for you to understand that the normal life cycle of the development of an ISO standard takes 3 years. So if we started in July, we are expected to have a final approved international standard in 3 years from then. In this chart, you are seeing that it says in 2025, which is 2 years from now and not 3 years from now.
No, 26.
Oh, sorry, 26, which is 2 years from now and not 3. Okay. Well, if we are able to do it in 2 years, the better, of course, but it requires time. Why it requires time? First, because after that experts draft that Jurgen and his team leaded and that we submitted with the new work item proposal form, now we are working in a first working group draft. You saw the list of experts nominated by the different countries. Out of them, we asked for volunteers to become editors. So we have 2 editors representing IBCS, let's say, which are Jurgen and
Matthias?
Matthias, thank you. And we have 3 other co-editors that come from the plain language world, Sabine, Roslyn, and Aneta. So what we are working now is first on the plain language side. That's why I say initially we thought it was weird to have been placed in this working group, but now I think it's something positive because people that understands nothing or just a little bit on what IBCS is about are reading the initial draft and they are rephrasing it using the plain language principles. So making it more understandable for everyone. After that, Jurgen and the IBCS editors will review to make sure that the technical content is correct. And once we are at that point, we will circulate inside the working group a first working group draft where we will get the feedback, direct feedback from the different experts of the different countries. For that, we are using a new tool that has been developed recently, which is called OSD, which is a kind of online editor for ISO standards. So our initial draft is already loaded in the OSD tool, and it will be updated once we have that new draft with the support of the plain language people and the IBCS technical people. And as I said, the first round will be kind of informal. The experts that also belong to the working group 11 will provide their feedback and it will be discussed. Once that the draft has some consensus among the experts represented in the working group, it will be submitted for a committee draft. If you go back to the slide with the table of the dates, you will see here that it says stage 2099 working draft approved for registration as committee draft. Okay, when the draft is sent as a committee draft, it's sent to every single country that belongs to the technical committee and the experts, not only the ones that represent the countries in the ISO meetings, but every single expert in the mirror committee that they have in the local national certification or standardization body, they will participate and they will submit comments. We consider in China that the third paragraph of the second clause should be changed. This text should be this other text. And we can collect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments. And that's where the work of the editorial team starts, because those comments first have to be reviewed by the editors, agree on a proposed action, which can be accept the content, the comment, and then apply it. So if they suggest a change, apply that change, reject it. If you reject it, you have to say why you reject that proposal, accept it in principle, or what, there are a few others, but mainly accept, reject. Let's go for that. And once the editors have an initial proposal, it has to go to meetings with the rest of the working group. So every expert in the working group has the possibility of discussing, and consensus has to be reached. So it could take ages. So ballots, the voting periods where the draft goes to the countries and they can submit comments are processes that take 2, 3, 4 months. Then the comments are collected, the editors review, and the working group decides on the changes to be applied. When all that work is done, a new round of voting is done again. The updated draft is sent again to the countries. The countries with the experts comment again, and we start a circle that minimum will have 2 rounds: the CD draft, the committee draft round, and this round, which is the draft of international standard. At that point, there is one more voting, but at that point, it's no longer at the technical committee level. It's the whole standardization body of each country that can submit comments. So even people not belonging to the mirror committees in the country, so someone who is specialized in whatever, not related to the task, can say, hey, but we disagree on this standard being published because there is another standard in another technical committee that considers that it belongs to them, whatever. It could be whatever comment. So it's wider, the spectrum, and longer. So I think it's also about at least 4 months. And that would be the ballot of the international standard.
Okay, Diego, seems pretty complicated. So the question, so the question is, why are we doing that? We already had a standard before, the IBCS standard notation, and now we want to make it an ISO standard. So what are the benefits for the people out there having an ISO standard instead or in addition? Probably it will not 100% replace, it will only be a part, but an ISO standard in addition to the IBCS standard. What do you think? What are the benefits?
As you may know, there are many organizations that provide standards. It could be governmental organizations, or they could be even private organizations. Sometimes, if Microsoft, Apple, Meta, whatever, agree on a technical specification, that's also a standard. Here we are talking about standards that are led by international organizations where every single country is represented. So ISO, out of those types of organizations, probably is the most widespread. Benefits, first of all, becoming an ISO standard gives the IBCS principles much wider visibility. Then it also provides more strength, I would say. It's not the same that, okay, a few guys have created something called IBCS, how nice it is, or an ISO standard supported by more than 150 countries. It's much more powerful. It would help software companies to develop against that ISO standard.
Software
vendors, for instance, yes. We are considering, our proposal is that this ISO 24896 is a requirement standard, so it could be audited. So an organization will be able to show conformity with the standard and show some kind of certificate. We are compliant with this standard, having a number of audits as any other ISO standard. So there are a number of benefits. And yes, of course, having people from other parts of the world involved should improve the work. Of course, for those that are IBCS lovers, if in an ISO working group, it's agreed to change something that for IBCS is a rule that it's mandatory, okay, it could be at some point a problem, but I think that we should expect that the changes will be helpful more than unhelpful. I don't know if I'm explaining it good enough, but the point is, okay, sometimes someone will discuss, why do you suggest this and why not this other way? So some discussion, some fresh discussion will be bring to the table.
Yeah. And there is one last thing I have in mind, and this is probably, especially for our audience today, interesting. If you are already, let's say, um, convinced that having a consistent notation is helpful in your organization, telling your boss that there is an ISO standard is probably a much better argument than saying, oh, there have been some guys originally in Germany that created some kind of international business communication standard. I find that cool. So I think it's a much stronger argument for people who want this to implement this standard in their organization. And I can tell you, I would not expect, Diego, that the final ISO standard is very far away from what we have as IBCS notation today. Frankly spoken, it might happen, as you said, that there are some changes, but I think starting work today, on the IBCS standards, visiting training courses, probably also already trying to get software that is capable in doing that. It's worth doing that today, because in 2 or 3 years, there will then be the ISO standards, and then you are already there. Okay,
Yeah,
look.
I agree. The only point is that people in the working group, experts from other countries, will discuss every single thing that for us are probably axioms that cannot be changed because they were defined that way by someone, and they will say, why? Or why not this other way? So it will be an interesting discussion, and probably the criteria will not change, but we will be required to discuss and reinforce why we consider something is in some way or the other. I don't consider that to be a problem. It's if the argument is good,
Yeah,
why not? You know, but it could happen. In my opinion, what will be the relationship between IBCS and ISO? Let's imagine that in 3 years from now, ISO 24896 is already published. My understanding is that an ISO standard should define what to do, and IBCS will develop further those what's into hows. That what can be done this way, this way, this way, and provide examples in much more detail in how to implement those ISO requirements. So in 3 years from now, the ISO standard should say what to do, and IBCS should become a framework and a specification. Maybe the S of IBCS instead of standards has to become specification or whatever else. So it's a how implement and probably extend what's in the ISO document.
Okay, thank you, Diego. We are already over time, so I would like to briefly look in the Q&A session whether there are some things we should answer. And I find a question from Franco. I'm curious about the relative number of certified consultants, because 80 does, or a little more than 80, does not sound that big. Well, I know why this is the case, because you only become a certified consultant if you have been running through the training courses and you manage to do the exam and all that stuff, which is a process. So you really have to go through that. And this started in Central Europe. And we don't do that for that long time so far. So hopefully there will be much more of them in the near future, now that it becomes an ISO standard. Then we have a question. How do you measure success of a standard? Well, this is a good question. The success of a standard is adoption. So if there is a standard and no one uses it, then it's not worth it. Frankly spoken, this is what it is. So we need to get more adoption. But I think with ISO as an organization supporting that standard, we will get much more adoption than we already have today. And it's already today. Hey, there's quite some adoption with thousands of companies out there, and 11 software vendors who have been adopting the principles in their software packages.
Yeah,
Okay,
let me add something on that.
Yeah.
Our first metric is the sales of the standard. As probably you know, we haven't talked about pricing, but ISO standards have cost. All the work that the experts do developing a standard is for free, is pro bono. So you do it because you want to contribute to the normalization world. In fact, we may have the Word document, well, no longer because now we will be working in the OSD, but you may have the Word document where you have been writing on standard and participating for a number of years. And once it's published and becomes a PDF, you have to pay for it. Even the editors have to pay for it unless ISO gives them a copy for their internal use.
Okay.
ISO standards are paid by the number of pages. So we expect to have a document about 20, 25 pages maximum. That will mean under 100 euros. For an organization, 100 euros shouldn't be a problem. Okay, that's more or less the cost. Under 100 euros is the cost that ISO 9001, ISO 20000, ISO 27001, all the main standards have a price like that. So the sales will be a first metric on the adoption. Then if the standard is a requirements standard and can be certified, then the number of organizations that ask for an certification is a second metric. ISO tracks that kind of metrics and publishes every year the top 10, for instance, standards that have more certifications, and even track in which countries, so we know for each of the different standards which are the top countries adopting each of these standards.
Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Great. Thank you, Diego. Then we have a question: will IBCS and under construction coexist with ISO? Oh, you've already answered that. Okay, fine with that. Is there any planned work on implementing standards in business analytic tools such as Power BI? Well, actually, there are 5 plugins that are capable in doing the IBCS notation for Power BI. And we had the program manager responsible for the visuals in Power BI as a speaker at our IBCS annual conference in Milan this year. And he disclosed that there is at least some basic support of IBCS notation also upcoming in Power BI natively. You probably realized that they already started overlapping columns if there is need to, that they already started supporting hatch patterns. The reason why is IBCS. So they are aware and they are, let's say, at least moving into that direction. Okay, then we have a question. With this ISO standard in place, I'm sure it will be finalized. Will there be some ISO certificate? Well, we have been talking about that. Yes, there will most probably be. How does this certification work? Frankly spoken, we do not know exactly yet. And it's not only us. There are certification bodies out there that, Walter Müllner, you sound kind of German. Probably you know that TÜV is providing certification. No, not sure whether they will start providing certification on ISO 24896. They then have to get accredited, I think is the word, Diego. Huh? They have to be accredited as a certifying body organization, something like that. So not sure how that will work finally, but I'm pretty sure.
Not different from any other ISO certification. So if you are familiar with ISO 9001 or any other ISO certification process, it won't change too much.
Okay, then we have a question of organizational thing, which is whether where we record that session. Yes, we record that session. We will also share it this time. Typically, we don't share them, but we cannot repeat a discussion. So it's more a webcast today, and this is why we record it and we share it with the participants. And we also share it with American guys who were not capable in just doing it that time because it's too early in the morning. Okay, what is the average probability for an approved item to succeed? Oh, this is a good question. What would you say, Diego?
I would say that after having an initial ballot for accepting the initiative in the technical committee and then having 2 ballots for the new work item proposal, it only depends on us. The rules for ISO are very strict in some ways. For instance, if the standard is not developed in 3 years, you can ask for an extra year of extension. If not, it will be retired. So it's up to us to reach consensus with those other experts on what we want to have published in this standard. So that's the first risk, that we get lazy or that we don't reach consensus with the rest of the representatives of the different countries. Honestly, it doesn't worry me too much. For all my experience in ISO, I've never seen or I just seen a few, very few standards that were not succeeding in the process itself.
Okay.
What is more common is that after those 3 years, the standard is published, but every standard in ISO has to be reviewed every 5 years. So before 5 years, a decision has to be made. Keep the standard as it is, work on a new edition, or withdraw the document. So if we withdraw a document, which can happen, okay, then we have an issue. Why it could happen if ISO considers that it has not enough support, or when the ballot or the resolution to decide whether to keep, update, or withdraw the standard has more votes saying, okay, we tried with this, but it seems that it's not being useful to the market or whatever else, then it could be withdrawn. It's a second risk, but the standard would have been published and available for more than 5 years. Then it's up to us again to get the support and the commitment of the organizations, the software vendors, these consultants, etc. on that.
Yeah. Okay, then there are quite some questions about changes. I think we already answered some of them. So we would not expect too many changes. Frankly spoken, that might happen, but we would not expect too many changes during the thing while we develop. And then there's a question, how difficult is it to make changes after the initial ISO standard has been published? And well, Diego just explained, there is a review and there changes then can only be made within the ISO reviewing process. Is that right?
There could be exceptions. For instance, last year there was something called the Declaration of London or something like that about sustainability, and many standards had to be reviewed just to include some specific clauses on sustainability. But that's, to me, it happened once in 15 years. So it could happen if there is something very, very important. We don't need to wait those 5 years in order to develop a new edition of the standard. But normally, I would say after it's published, we shouldn't expect changes in a number of years.
Yeah.
Another set of questions, what they ask is, will this standard change too much compared to IBCS? First of all, I think we should clarify that we are focusing on semantic notation. Okay, so out of the rules on IBCS is mainly
the unify part. Yes, it's the unify
the
part.
unify part.
Yeah.
Okay, why? Because some things are best practices and it's difficult to make them become a requirement. However, the semantic notation, which is what helps us to see patterns and realize and understand some meaning and conveying a message automatically just by having a look, is what's the focus on this. Okay, so it would be mostly about the unify part, and the rest of IBCS will be complementary but not included in the standard.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at the questions, I think we answered most of them. There is one final thing I would like to do in a one-on-one. Walter Müllner, please reach out to me just personally so I can support you in teaching that stuff. He's working at the university, and ask for some support for in all out there. If you want to include that into your academic work, in case you are working at the university or some because this is where it belongs, huh? So please connect with me on LinkedIn or drop me an email or whatever, and we will help you as good as we can. Well, then I think we should stop it, because now 1 hour is gone. Actually, we had expected after 45 minutes to be finished. So let me thank you out there for attending. I see still a lot of participants are with us, so not too many left, which is a great sign that it's obviously an interesting topic. Let me thank you, Diego, for being with us today, and not only for being with us today, but for supporting that initiative for almost 2 years now. I'm really grateful for your support. I would never have, or we at IBCS in total, we would never have achieved this without your support. So much appreciated. Thank you for that. And guys out there, start your journey today. You can just go to ibcs.com and look for webinars, for seminars. We give training courses, we give them online, we give them on site. And you can look for software already supporting the things we suggest in ISO 24896. So let's get starting, and let's also just disseminate this message. There is an upcoming standard, and this is definitely good news. So thank you for attending today, and hope to see you on one of our courses. So bye-bye.